You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, guys. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always, and welcome to February. I cannot believe we're already in February. We're pre-election now. We're going to start talking about election issues, things that John Kerry versus the Liberal Party essentially is going to be talking about in what is still Perth's number one issue. It's property. You're listening to this podcast because you're interested in property every single week. You're someone who is a massive fan of this podcast, and I thank you very much for it. Or you're someone who's starting to recognize that this is the place to listen to where the real experts, the big guys in this industry, have those conversations and can have a safe chat about what's impacting their business and, more importantly, their industry, because we're all so passionate about it. And hopefully there's enough people on the government side listening to do something about it or start planning for doing something about it for this next election period. Jeremy Cordina is in the room with me today. He's the General Manager of Parcel. We've had him in a couple of years ago, giving us an update on where Parcel's at, what they do, and what's going on in the industry. It's a really timely interview to catch up with him to get some stats around how Parcel, one of Perth's biggest land developers, is going in terms of their delivery and their pipeline and how that affects us as an industry, as a community, but also stats that he needs in running his business on a daily basis with regards to how well our industry in general is going, whether we're starting to bridge the gap, starting to get there, or whether we're falling flat on our ass and failing. Jeremy, how you going, mate? Thanks for coming back in.
Thanks for having me again, Trent. Appreciate it.
What's the last couple of years been like in Parcel? Can you give us some themes? Has it been a successful couple of years? Has it been busy? Has it been slow? Has it been restructures? Has there been a lot of excitement? What's been the real celebrations, things that you've been really happy about? And then I guess I'll ask you next, what's been tough?
Yeah, sure. It's been continuing to grow. I think we're second or third biggest land developer in the state at the moment, continuing to buy more land in order to backfill the pipeline. We'll touch on these themes later on, but we haven't been able to keep up with the demand that is out there at the moment, nor over the last few years.
That's a good thing for business.
Yeah, it's a good thing for business.
Keep a waiting list.
Yeah, we appreciate it's not a great customer experience when they look at our price list and there's nothing on there again. We're constrained by construction, really. We've got plenty of land in the pipeline and more to come, but just can't put them out quick enough.
What are a couple of land developments that listeners would recognise that you guys are doing right now and some milestones you've hit over the last couple of years?
We started a few new ones over the last 6 months. So we're up in Yanchep, our indie project, pushing out 100 plus lots a year. We've just started our Mundajong project, which we're looking at putting out a couple of 100 lots a year. We've also wound a whole bunch of them up too. So we finished our Southern River and Wellard projects. We're about to finish up in Baldivis. A lot of those projects that have been in market for a long time are now finishing up, and we're moving on to the next one.
So I guess the strategy here is to be across all geographical
markets,
spokes of Earth. Yep. Is there direction that you think has got the most legs, not just from a demand point of view, but from a government approvals point of view, where you think is going to be where everyone, not just Parcel, is going to have the best time, the easiest time getting stuff to market?
I think those corridors where the train lines have turned up recently, Yanchep, the depth of demand and the amenity that's up there is really good. And then obviously pushing up to Ellenbrook at the moment. I think it's only just opened recently, but that now has fully established itself as a corridor. Once the Byford train station opens, that it converts from being a significant drive into those centres, and it should really be a train ride. Now, the challenge is that patronage is getting people on to those trains. Yeah. But that infrastructure elsewhere in the country, you go to Brisbane, there is significant activity around each one of those train stations and significant density that you see in those greenfield subdivisions. So I think we need to look to the east and start delivering projects like that. And that's going to be a challenge with the makeup of our construction industry in Western Australia.
And the cost profile in apartments, or I guess any level of density, proper density, and the detached dwelling model as well.
Yeah.
Do you ever think we'd be talking about places like Mundajong and Yanchep and Bullsbrook as residential urban areas when you were 25 getting in the industry?
Maybe not that long ago, but all of those areas have been zoned residential for the best part of 20 years.
So an urban deferred sort of space.
Yeah, that's
initially.
right. So
Yep.
the footprint hasn't necessarily expanded. It was always there. It was just a gradual filling out of the areas in between. You look at that southeastern corridor now, you've really only got 2 markets out there, but pretty much established and rolling into its final years. And Piara Waters, Gosnells is finished. Like, there's rats and mice as far as volume in there, but the only 2 volume markets that exist or will exist in the next 10 years are Hilbert and Mundajong, which is not a lot when you think that we're still getting 50-odd thousand international migrants turn up in the city of Perth every year.
And we'll definitely talk about that. Do you think the golden mix for a land developer, especially an global land developer, is to be close enough to existing services and nodes, but far enough from NIMBYs and naysayers so you can get on with it from a planning point of view and also from an infrastructure point of view?
Yeah, we've had that direct experience, Trent. We've developed a number of smaller infill developments. The smallest one we've done and wrapped up recently was 13 lots in Bayswater.
On the river?
On the river.
Prince Street?
Around Ingles Place, I think it was. And the process to get through a small job like that takes almost as long as the big stuff, which you're then pushing out 100 plus lots per annum. There certainly is an our experience, and we only have a finite experience, but in our experience with the infill councils, we've struggled to get them through in what we would deem a more appropriate time, considering you really are just doing a simple land subdivision.
I've got experience having developed 2-lot subdivisions and a number of 2-hectare subdivisions to those sort of sizes.
Yeah.
It's actually quicker to develop 2 hectares, 40 lots than it is to develop 700 square meters, 2 lots. The planning approvals are what they are, but the civil side is more refined. There's less people whinging about what you're doing. And at the end of the day, in that same time frame, obviously is with more capital, you're making more of a difference to try and fix that supply issue in Western Australia. And I can understand how the smartest businesses in Perth, generally the ones with the most capital and the most experience, would go, why would I bother again with 13 lots when I can do 130 lots with the same people in the same time?
And similar capital as well.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's probably it's being able to leverage that same amount of capital to get more and more supply out of it. We still have aspiration to have land supply across all key markets, and infill is one of those, but it is becoming more and more difficult to find the sites that aren't heavily constrained either by contamination or objection to development of those sites. And the size of them is such that you're only really putting out, 50, 60 lots at best.
Parcel sits within the ABN group, essentially Dale Alcock's baby.
Yes, yep.
It used to have a apartment development, a built form division a few years ago.
It did, yeah.
Built apartment. I guess it cut its teeth developing medium-sized apartment buildings like Addition in Como. You can see that on the right-hand side as you're travelling down the freeway towards the city. Or Fringe in Highgate. I believe it's Highgate.
Yep.
On Williams Street on the right-hand side. 2 really cool urban infill, medium-sized apartment developments.
In the suburbs.
Then obviously the price escalations came in. That whole team was made redundant, I assume, or moved on.
The cost side of apartment builds is substantial unless the existing dwellings or stratas in those markets reached a certain point. Customers were deciding between a possibly more expensive apartment as opposed to a less expensive 3x1 rear strata sort of thing. So I think the recent price increases in those inner city markets will help that equation, but we still have a industry that is pretty devoid of apartment builders, and therefore the competition in that space isn't probably what it needs to be, or it certainly isn't what it is on the eastern coast anyways.
I guess the point I'm making is you've got one of the most efficient integrated businesses in the industry in WA, being the ABN Group, who make half of the stuff they put into these places,
Yep.
right? So Dale's got his fingers in all of it. He can make the most of all the efficiencies of costs and people and time to get these things right. And then he's gone and had a crack at a couple of apartment buildings that the state government would be really happy with, and the community, I think, is happy with. And then he's gone, and then essentially the cost structures have started to change since COVID. They've exploded way faster than the market can afford to pay for them. And the guy with the most efficiencies in providing these medium-sized apartments, who you'd think has the best chance to keep that team going and fund them to give them a couple of projects every year, has had to go, we can't do it, mate. I'm sorry. We're just going to have to deploy that capital somewhere where we can actually make a dollar and the market can afford the price we would have had to set to develop that. That's a bit of an indictment on the whole industry, isn't it, as to where we are right now. If Dow Alcott can't get medium-sized apartments going and has essentially retrenched a division in the business, which I'm sure he hated to do, then how many more people in Perth can?
I think that the reality of the apartment market in Western Australia is that it only constitutes 2 or 3% of the overall housing market, whereas on the East Coast, it's more like 30 plus. And as a result, it doesn't have a lot of maturity, doesn't have a lot of competition, and therefore doesn't have the same sort of efficiencies that you're seeing in the single residential market. Single residential market in Perth's been here forever.
Probably the best market in the country.
Very efficient.
It's the most experienced market.
Yeah. And so if I'm sitting there advising government, which I'm not, that would be where I'd be focusing. You need to focus on construction and encourage some of those eastern states construction companies over here to bid on tenders that I'm sure are out there. I know WA have a number of sites that they're looking to deliver. Having government deliver these sites is great, but if they're delivering those sites at a number that nobody else can replicate,
super inefficient taxpayer.
Yeah, exactly. They need to be commercially viable, otherwise you won't have the rest of the market rolling in behind.
Well, we said that obviously prices are bridging slowly back towards it, but is there any word from your boss that he's going to reopen the built form division anytime soon?
I haven't spoken to him about that, but the fact that the prices are bridging is real. The forecasts for this next financial year is that prices aren't going backwards, they're going upwards. And when you roll back to the simple high-level stats of people coming into the state, vacancy rates, and our position in Perth against the other capital cities, it all points to numbers going up. I'm a numbers man. I believe in the numbers, and that might not be good news to a lot of...
That's a very political answer of getting around answering the actual question of, do you reckon one of the most influential people in dwelling development in Western Australia still has an appetite for when it's going to work to get back into it? And if so, is there any view within the business right now that's anytime soon?
I don't know whether or not that appetite exists or otherwise, but ABN is a residential builder, and at the moment that is completely focused in
house and
land.
I'm going to take that as probably not connected. But again, that's not directed personally at ABN. It's more to ask the question broadly. If Dale's not thinking about it, it's probably not being thought about by many others. You're probably not having the Silvestro family own group thinking about opening an apartment development division, or Nigel Satterley going, you know what we should do soon is start to try and get apartments going. All these big guys in the end that deliver dwellings, that have the money, that have the teams, it sounds like they're still focused solely on the path of least resistance. That is probably the path that's most effective to hitting the numbers we need if we are ever going to hit those numbers, and that seems to be land development. Let's talk about how that's actually going right now and comparing that to where the need is, where the demand is sitting. I want to start with one of your smaller projects, Mosaic in Balcatta. That's one that is in a market where it is far more expensive per square metre than probably anything else you've got.
Yeah, it is,
But also in a market that you'd assume is less sensitive to interest rates or pricing, you'd hope.
Yep.
I would have thought you'd finished that development and sold it out by now. What's the reality there of why you haven't? I assume it's not lack of demand.
No, the approvals process in the City of Stirling is a challenging one. So that's taken a long time to get through all the relevant approvals. And then from a delivery perspective, we like to try and be accurate with our title delivery and make sure that lines up with when the site's actually ready. So we don't really do this 10, 12 month ahead of titles process. We like to be 3 to 4 months ahead of titles. And that's the reason that our estates might look as though there's nothing on the price book, because we're waiting till we hit that sort of band. Unfortunately, what's happening at the moment, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you sit, when we release, they usually disappear within half an hour to an hour, in which case there's still nothing on the price list the following days.
It's a site that used to be a rubbish tip, or
it's a swamp,
as most of that area, Princeton All was, and therefore there's a lot of remediation required for that site. Is that just a reality of that development, that it was always going to take a long time, or is it taking longer than you thought it would, and why?
It's taking longer than it should, and the reason why is that lack of understanding by some of those infill councils as to the fact that the sites that are left over are difficult sites.
Yeah, for a reason.
So they're either contaminated or they need remediation or they've got difficulty with the surrounding community who don't want the site to be developed. We've had that experience as well in Bayswater where the site was essentially just a mown grass patch, but people thought it was a park. As a result, we had years of problems trying to get through approval timeframes. So they're the types of situations that I'm sure we're no orphan in experiencing as a developer. They're quite small and minutiae, but if the government can somehow elevate those decisions out of the
team
and sort of bring them up to state significance, it might be a bit of a stretch, but that's going to help unlock a lot of sites that are sitting around. You will have driven around a lot of those areas and there's plenty of vacant land sitting around. You could carve up into 2, 3, 4, 5 dwellings, which would go a long way.
It's planning. So if you're having to put your finger on one pressure, it's actually planning and not construction delivery.
In the infill space, it's definitely an approvals concern. In the greenfield space, it's just capacity of construction.
Talk to me about that. What's the reality right now in terms of, look, we've got this much in. If we could flick a switch tomorrow, we'd have X lots delivered in parcel now, but we're currently restricted to Y. What would those look like?
We deliver about 1,000 a year and we could do 2. The construction market is at full capacity.
You just don't have the tractors, the front end loaders,
the people to sit in them.
What do you reckon land development across Perth's capacity is? I think it's about 14,000 when I look at the numbers. What do you think? Would you agree it's close?
Back in the 2006 boom, I think it was, we did 26, 27.
At the moment, what is it?
At the moment, you'd be lucky to be 50.
All right. And what you're saying is we're at 50%. So if you double that, we're back to 26, 27, 28. Right?
And that'll do it.
And that would probably get us a lot closer to the issues we're facing right now, isn't it? When you add a couple of thousand apartments a year, if we're lucky.
Yeah, that's right. If you have both of those segments running at full tilt, you're meeting demand, which means you're probably keeping a lid on price too.
The interesting thing is I've been beating my drum for the last, however long it's been, years, but more specifically last couple of months on this particular point, that there's no point asking the land development industry to do more than it's doing. It's doing what it can do. Really, we need to absolutely unhinge the apartment development space and get an extra 10,000 apartments a year out of them. If we don't, we're never going to make this. What you're saying to me is, hey, Trent, it's probably easier to buy more tractors and get Watercorp to work a bit harder than to get the apartment stuff going right now. We've done it before in 15, we did it before 20 years ago. We can do it again. Yeah. We could just double land development and we would be able to start hitting those numbers.
Yeah.
Could you give us a bit more detail? I'm saying very callously it's tractors and sewers. What actually...
It's bums on seats, essentially. The contractors have the capital to buy more tractors if they had another person to put in the tractor. I know that workers are fluid and they'll move in and out of the construction sector, whether it be infrastructure or housing or mining. Mm-hmm. Of those three, the most attractive from a REM structure is mining, and that's just the reality of it.
What you're saying is that we had the people last boom.
Yeah.
We don't have them this time, and it's because they're probably working for Rio Tinto and Gina Reinhardt and these
possibly
places.
That's the only explanation I can come up with. We certainly have enough people rolling in
terms of state immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. To have 80-odd thousand turn up in a financial year is a lot of people. Now, whether or not that will then result in increases in staffing levels over the next year or so, probably will. So it's certainly getting better out there. Contractors are becoming more available. 6 months ago, you couldn't get a contractor to bid on a project. Now you're getting 3 or 4.
So you think that's probably not because there's less work around. It must mean they've got more people.
Yeah, that's the assumption. And the developers have started building bigger stages. Efficiencies have got better on our side. We have confidence that we'll sell through that stage. So we're going to build 50 to 100 lots, not 15.
Yeah, got ya. And 18 months ago, it really was.
Yeah, exactly right, which is not efficient in any way, shape or form.
Prices have been a pressure for the land development industry on both sides over the last few years. A few years ago, you were selling land at prices where the owner, the developer, whether it's Dale or it's Nigel, was sitting there going, Jesus, this is like amazing. And then I think within half a year last year, a lot of the land prices have gone up 30, 40% per square metre. And therefore that 375 square metre block has gone from 290 to 390 in less of a season over the last quarter of last year. And demand, and that was obviously a function of demand just being mental, because FOMO, everyone's decided suddenly they're not scared of building anymore.
Yeah.
The established house prices are knackered. Let's go build again. This is great. You guys are probably going, fantastic. We can push through the pipeline. And then you start to see the numbers on sales soften a bit in the last quarter of last year.
Yep.
And I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what's going on here. And I'm starting to think in my head since Christmas, as I hear builders start to talk to me, that it's not the demand isn't there. It's that if a regular Joe and his partner can afford an $800,000 package, and that package is made up of a $350,000 lot and a $350,000 build, then yeah, sweet, we're ahead. Sign up today. But as that price for that block's gone from 350 to 410, and the build price has gone from 350 to 370, 380 every month, it's ticking up, and now that's at 410. We're currently got a package of 820, and I can't afford more than 800 unless interest rates drop. Am I right?
Yeah, I'd suggest absolutely. The reality is that a large portion of our market has a price ceiling of 700, 750. So once you go beyond that number, you're just cutting out more and more of the market.
Stuck in the house they're in or in the rental they're in right now.
Yeah.
Something I've noticed recently is they move from the preference they had, which might be your Piara Waters, it might be your Henley Brook, it might be somewhere closer to the city than Yanchep.
Yeah.
The sales rep at the building company goes, have you looked at Bullsbrook? Never would they have expected to go, we're going to live in Bullsbrook, Dallin, let's bring up the family here. They realize that the build price is just going up. It's not stopping. It's not going to go backwards. We know that as well. So therefore, I either make this call on Bullsbrook or do nothing and still spin my wheels in the established market trying to buy something.
Yeah.
So that's where it seems to be going. The land development sales pipeline seems to have transitioned from a lot of places where your Brabhams, your Henley Brooks, for example, just using the northeast corridor,
Yeah. Yep.
to just cheaper land.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the same thing? Does that change the profile of where you guys are selling and therefore putting your efforts to develop right now?
Our portfolio is our portfolio. So we always push our portfolio and make sure we're selling in every single one of our estates. It doesn't cost a different number to build the same home in Henley Brook versus the only variable factor is that land component. If you are stuck at the top end of your budget, the location is one of those variables that you have a look at.
And I would like to think there's a bunch of land developers right now, if that's where their price point saturation is, where their focus is, they're sitting there with their fingers and toes crossed going, please get us a rate cut, please give us a rate cut. Because then that same person can now afford to pay you for that land at the price you set it at in June still.
There's very rarely a government silver bullet, but I think there's one that's being put into the gun as we sit here today, and that is in the way it's called shared equity in the federal context. I think it's buyer assist or something along those lines. In that scheme, essentially the government picks up 30% of the home. That reduces your financial burden through interest expense of that particular purchaser. They've got limits in relation to packages and what you're allowed to be on, so it's targeted at lower income earners. A 30% reduction in a house and land package is a significant number, right?
People, I think, will just take it because they're the ones going to be able to live in that property anyway. I think at the end of the day, it's identifying the priority of the market right now.
Yeah.
It is simply just getting in a home rather than sticking it out to try and save for that location that they would have liked to have been in. And I guess we saw the same thing in the established market where we saw Camillo go up 34% last year rather than people just holding out to try and get into Southern River. Yeah, it's obvious when I say it out loud, but I guess it talks to just the reality that there are some price pressures being hit right now in affordability in our market.
Yeah, absolutely.
And either we're going to have to wait for an interest rate cut or land developers, because builders won't do it, are going to have to drop some prices on some of that $1,000 a square metre stuff.
Yeah, and you might see that occur based on developers wanting to hit volumes, because the reality is that there's over 1,000 people a month coming into the state. All of those people coming in have a budget. This is unfortunately the normal boom-bust cycle that Perth's so very good at. We overshoot it in both directions, and hopefully it's able to stabilise.
Let's talk about overshooting and how close we are to doing that. We referenced at the start that we would talk about whether we are getting there or whether we're nowhere near getting there. I guess the artificial relief for some buyers in terms of prices is just going to be interest rates dropping sometime this year, and land developers are going to be waiting for that too in terms of being able to maintain their prices. It's a business at the end of the day. But as a state, let's talk about the numbers for a second more clearly on how we've been going in terms of starting to pare back that deficit of dwellings versus immigration numbers, or whether that deficit is still increasing. What do you got for me?
Up until the end of the FY22 financial year, we were matching demand or beating it, which means we had a surplus.
What are the numbers?
So we're sitting at around 10,000 dwellings per annum over that period of time up until the FY22.
What is that, a
I mean,
reduction?
It was fluctuating from between a 10,000 surplus to a 10,000 deficit. So it works its way out, up and down.
We were within range all the way through
Yep.
COVID up until 2022 on what we're producing versus how many people are coming in.
Yeah, that's right. And then 22, 23 FY turns up, we get a net interstate dwelling requirement of 30,000 dwellings, and we produce 10.
Okay, so why do we need 30-odd thousand dwellings? Because we had how many people coming?
We had almost 90,000. We divide it by 2.3, but the average occupancy per dwelling, and we guess it at being 32,000 dwellings required. Now, dwellings is both the established market, apartments and land, but this
Well, we're not making
established
any more
listings,
established.
houses were pretty much maxed out. That left us with a shortfall of sort of 27-odd thousand for that financial year. And then this financial year, we've got the same numbers. So all that's happened is that we're now got a shortfall of 50-odd thousand dwellings.
So adding those up, accumulating that.
Exactly.
Yep,
So
okay.
it's just adding on top.
Okay, so we're 50,000 dwellings down now as an accumulated surplus on your numbers.
Yeah.
And the last year's numbers were 16,000.
Yep.
Last quarter just came in at 5,800, which talks to more
Better.
of an annualizing in the 20s now. But still, we're bringing people in every year, more than we're building. So that deficit is probably going to continue to increase. What we're saying is we're not actually solving this problem.
No, we're going backwards a little bit at the moment. And the catch-22 is that in order to fix it, we probably need more people to be in that construction industry. But we also have a problem with exactly how many people are in that industry versus other industries that don't help the housing supply.
Yeah, and when we think about the state election, it's obvious the Labor government's going to win this one. So it will be business as usual. I think John Kerry's doing as much as he can, but he's also hamstrung by the fact that he doesn't control immigration and who comes in. And if we have 90,000 people come in, the issue is that only less than 10,000 of those are actually helping our industry. The rest of them are doing other things like studying. And so they're actually just creating more of a burden. And then you go to the federal election and you've really got two choices there. One is the same of what's been going on from a federal side, which is who actually controls our immigration. And then you've got the Liberal side with Peter Dutton saying, hey, I just want to slow down immigration massively. Now, that's going to be a double-edged sword because we still need to have a whole bunch of tradies coming into it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the slowdown will actually eventually help because eventually our industry will be able to catch up. And then the question is, do we overshoot, right?
And what's happening with the mining sector as well? If that slows down and all of a sudden you have a huge resource that becomes available in a fairly short time frame. All of these things hold each other's hand and influence each other, so it's very difficult to pull one lever. But the mining cool-off, if it is happening, may actually be the solution that allows us to build more.
Yeah, we'll get starting to redeploy that human capital back into our land industry. And I guess a really good identifier for people, punters listening along, is that if we do start seeing the land industry be able to punch out annual figures, annual lot production figures, and therefore completions of houses at some point as well, you'd hope, that are into the late 20s, 30,000.
Yeah.
We probably solved the problem. That's probably an indicator that we've got there. That would be a record as well for us, right? But we're still in the teens. As long as we're still in the teens, and as long as immigration continues to be positive and the mining industry doesn't collapse, you don't need to ask more questions about where our house prices are going, because as long as we can't solve this problem, demand will continue to outstrip supply.
I can't see a scenario in the next few years where that changes, to be honest.
That's a big call. It's not one that I disagree with, but it's important to hear it from leaders like yourself in the industry to go, look, I see this every day. I talk to all the contractors every day. I don't see us fixing this anytime soon. There doesn't seem to be a task force fixing this right now, and we're doing our best. If we could, we'd be doing double, and we're not. So final question, if you had a hotline to John Kerry and Rita Saffioti from a Treasury point of view to try and help you do your job better, how can Jeremy be more effective in his role of helping to supply lots of land, which is part of the mix, to West Australia's property market? John, I need you to help me, mate. This is my one ask before the election. What would that be?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I genuinely believe they're doing everything they can and have done for some time now. Delivery of those infrastructure projects, such as Metronet, has made a huge difference and increased the viability of those areas we touched on earlier, such as Mundijong and Yanchep. So no, I think for us, stability is probably the key thing that we will ask for. We're working as hard as we can, and I know all of our contractors are as well, and we just need to keep moving quickly without any changes.
You mentioned one theme earlier, and that was pulling some of your projects out of local hands and into state hands. Would that make your life easier?
Yeah, probably would. Some of those infill councils don't necessarily have the same skill set or agenda as the greenfield councils who are doing this stuff at scale every day. I think that would be helpful. There are obviously mechanisms at the moment where you can go through the state, but maybe they need to be extended to a lower level. Like you can go to JDAP. Yeah, exactly.
You can't do it for land.
But yeah, so maybe that could be looked at. We certainly had experience in that infill area where it's harder than it should be.
Jeremy Cordina, GM at Parcel Property, one of Perth's biggest land developers and one of the most effective companies in the mix right now, helping us with our supply problem. Thanks for coming in, being a part of the conversation. I look forward to hearing the feedback from everyone listening along and hoping that the guys in government are listening as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!